all of us in the room are focused on. And so if you need help with designing a new store, putting a new retail face on your operations, now you have a good head start. Sharon Lassard, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, now I would like to turn to our CEO panel, where we will hear firsthand from our regional carriers about what strategies are working for them, maybe learn what they see ahead for us. Leading the discussion and introducing our distinguished panelists will be Mike Dano of Fierce Wireless. I think everybody knows or have read articles from Mike. And why don't we try to bring out the panel, and I'll say a little about Mike. As I said, he's no newcomer to the world of wireless, having covered the wireless industry as a journalist for more than a decade. Today, he serves as editor-in-chief of the telecom group for Fierce Markets, which includes Fierce Wireless, Fierce Telecom, Fierce Video, and other publications. And maybe Mike will get some of these sage advisors and leaders to share their crystal ball with us as we look into the future. Mike, I'll let you and the distinguished group join the stage. Hey, Michael. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
We'll find out.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Name. Hey. There we go. Got my name on there. Great. Okay. Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I appreciate it. Thank you, Steve, for the wonderful introduction. I don't deserve it, for sure. And so for this discussion, I am very excited about this discussion. And so I want to keep things moving pretty quick because we have some really high-powered speakers here today, and I know you want to hear from them for as much as we possibly can in the time that we have. And I'm hoping that we can cover a lot of ground today. We've got all kinds of issues to talk about: fixed wireless, Internet of Things, 5G, roaming, the list goes on. And so my hope today is to get to as much of that as we can in the time that we have. So I guess first, just to set the stage so that everybody knows kind of where we stand, is maybe I can have each of you just very briefly introduce yourselves and talk about the area that you guys cover and kind of what your operations are. And so I'll turn it to you, Michael, first.
Michael Pryor with ATN International. We're a holding company, public holding company with a collection of operating subsidiaries in the telecom space. And most relevant to this group is our ComNet wireless subsidiary, which operates in covers something over 200,000 square miles, mostly in the Southwest, both filling in white space for all carriers and also some retail operations and partnerships with some of the tribes and other areas. And we also have a retail quad play in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is a is considered an RLEC place.
Okay. Pat, go ahead.
Pat Reardon with Cellcom, and Cellcom operates in northeast Wisconsin, north Wisconsin, and the Upper Peninsula. We've got about 35 retail stores, and we cover areas including Green Bay, which of course has our Green Bay Packers. Our spokesperson is Coach McCarthy. So our organization covers an area of probably a couple 100,000 customers, up to 300,000, and we're happy to be here.
Great. I'm a Bears fan.
That'll be your problem.
But I have one share of Packers stock just for Pat. Ron Smith, Bluegrass Cellular. We serve central Kentucky. If you think of the I-65 corridor of Kentucky, that's us. Everything from Louisville, we don't include Louisville, all the way down to the Tennessee line, about 150 miles east to west. We provide wireless as well as fixed wireless services. Been in business since 1991. A long time, and about I was going to say 300,000 customers. That's you, right? 200,000 customers, and we look forward to the panel.
Great. And Craig.
Craig Sparks, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at C-Spire, and we don't have an NFL team, so go Packers.
All right.
That's very
Sorry, Ron.
Yeah. Who's in first place?
And so we're based out of Ridgeland, Mississippi, primarily the state of Mississippi with on the mobility side, and we are managed cloud and IT services. We had a recent acquisition of TechLinks based out of Birmingham to add to our capabilities there, in addition to fiber to the home and medium and small businesses.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm sure we'll get to lots of football questions today, but maybe we'll expand into that. So really, I just wanted to start with a very broad question for each of you to answer about what is your biggest concern right now, as in your role and for your company. So maybe Craig, I'll start with you. Is what's for C Spire and in the business that you run, in the mobile business particularly, what is your chief concern today here at the show?
On the mobility side, for us, it's in addition to the emphasis we're putting on growing to the fiber to the home and putting glass in the ground, that's going to continue. There's no lack of investment, but it's the fixed wireless, and we're in the middle of this transition between 4G and 5G, and the fixed wireless technologies, how to make good use of the 4G technologies, where they make sense, and where is the dividing line between where we would need to pull in what we're doing with 5G. And that investment, I think all of us, as we're looking at investment, we're still polishing up and improving. There's lots, as many of the speakers have mentioned, there's a good 10 years left in 4G, and there's a lot of performance to be wrung out of that still today. And so it's that balance between investment in the 4G network and what to put into 5G for us on the fixed wireless. And there's just a lot of trials and technology development work going on right now to hopefully make the right decisions and make the best course.
Okay. Ron?
I think like most carriers of our size, we're trying to sort of like you've got a three-dimensional chess set sort of thing. Right now, spectrum is a big issue primarily because of existing quality of services that we want to be able to provide to our customers, as well as future services we want to provide. We run both 4G network through band class 13 with Verizon, as well as our own band class 12 4G network. And in both cases, we're at a point where we've provided a great quality of service thus far, but as we see continued data growth, continued growth in customer base, we see that we need more spectrum. First and foremost, I think our focus is what we can do to augment our capabilities, our resources to go forward to make sure our customers continue to get a great experience.
Okay, and the FCC has been working to free up spectrum. Like, do you feel like there's been enough work in that area, or do you feel like it needs to go a little bit faster for you guys?
I think the FCC's done an extraordinary job in the last year of freeing up both the high band as well as mid-band spectrum. We went for a long period of time where it literally would take 10 years from the thought process of getting spectrum to be able to get it out into an auction. And the fact that they're doing it in 2 or 3 years, I think, is extraordinary. So I got to just compliment the current FCC and its actions.
Gotcha. Okay. And Pat, you want to answer the chief concern that you have right now?
Yeah, I think the chief concern we've got it's not things that we can control. We're happy with our ability to serve our customer. We're happy with the fact that we have the engineering capability to transition to 5G. Those are not concerns. What is a concern is the cost of roaming, because we don't have control over cost of national roaming, and that cost can be substantial, and we need to make sure that that stays reasonable and that we can be competitive.
Okay, and again, the FCC did issue some guidelines on roaming, I think, a year or two ago, but those have not sort of. Are you saying you need sort of more guidelines from the FCC, or is it more renegotiation with the roaming partners?
There's a whole list of concerns. One of the things that we don't have is we don't have any assurance that we're going to be able to afford roaming long term, because the cost of megabit keeps dropping. So whatever is being set now, it has to go lower, and we have no guarantees from the FCC that that's going to happen.
Okay, cool. And Michael?
I think really managing through change is, so broadly speaking, I think there's a lot of change going on, both in the competitive landscape, technologies, but also importantly, consumer usage and what's really important in terms of the wallet share. And I think that presents a lot of opportunity for all of us, but it also presents a lot of risk. And I think if you look at our, there's a lot of talk about the competitive landscape and traditional carriers shifting. That presents some challenges, but then you've got really technology coming from the other side with some of the big, we call them the web-centrics, but I look at eSIMs and things like that, software-defined SIMs, and I think it could be a very different world even 5 years from now in terms of who has the customer relationship and how you're delivering network.
Okay. Companies like Facebook and Google, those are the ones that with a combination of those and eSIM, that could seriously change the game?
I think a lot of the carriers here probably are going to be last to feel that a little bit because they've been very close to their customers in a very personal way. They know the market very well. But if you look at decisions that consumers make, are they going to be saying, should I go with Google Home or Alexa or Apple rather than who's my carrier, right? So when you buy a Kindle, you don't know who your carrier is.
Right.
Right? And there is a potential, I think, where those players can sit there and basically wholesale out to the carriers and sort of drive the economics.
Okay, interesting.
I'll second that.
That's another concern.
That's actually a really good vision in 5 years from now.
And I think the issue there is probably Amazon, if anyone. We have over the decades seen major retailers try to take the step of being a super retailer to be able to provide services for all the tier ones, as an example. Walmart tried to do that, didn't do a great job. But as Michael was indicating, as you get into the eSIM environment, it doesn't take a whole lot of step forward to be able to see a major online retailer try to be that super retailer. And that probably cuts out the regionals, the tier 2s to tier 3s. They'll focus on the tier 1s, and if that becomes the main selling mechanism for wireless down the line,
right.
It's a real challenge.
Okay. Well, on that happy note, I'm
a happy guy.
It's a little concerning, apparently. Following off of that, the next question I want to ask all of you is how do you separate yourselves from the national players? What is, if you could pick, of all the sort of strategies that you offer, what is the one thing that really does set you apart from an AT&T or a Verizon or potentially an Amazon? What is the competitive differentiator here? And so, Michael, I'm going to turn this one over to you to if you could pick one thing. If it's customer care, if it's coverage. I know all these things are important.
I think we're closer. We can be a lot more nimble than the big guys because we're less affected by that tape that is running, even though we're a public company too, and the existing install base, while it's important to all of us, I think there's great history. I've been to visit some of these operations. I know Pat's headquarters you visited, and there are some old garage bays because they started out, with car phones, as I recall, and they adapted because they focused on serving their customer base in their area. So I think that is an advantage, and even the sort of unhappy note I introduced, I'm not so sure it works that way because I think when you look at, let's say, an Amazon, they now have leverage to say, well, who has the best coverage in these areas? Who can really service my needs? And they might be more inclined to partner with a lot of the smaller carriers here. They certainly would need to also use national,
sure.
The national carriers. But especially if the smaller carriers act collectively in some ways, I think there actually could be opportunity there.
Okay. Pat, I'll give that one to you as sort of what is the competitive differentiator for you?
Yeah, customer knowledge. We know our customers better than our competition does. We know our territory better than our competition does. So in that respect, we service our territories better. We position our towers to cover what needs to be covered in our territory. So we have the best coverage of our local areas compared to the competition simply because we know it a lot better. We know what our customers are looking for, and we stay in contact with them. Customer care, we make sure that we're dealing with our customers on a one-to-one basis. When they call up, they're going to be getting a live person from the area that they may well know as far as that goes. So knowledge of the customer, I think, is number one.
Gotcha. Thank you. And Ron?
Yeah, Pat just took all my talking points, so I don't think I had to. But
Same. Ditto.
We're very similar. It comes down to, and I mentioned this before, if someone calls into our call center and asks about a problem that they're having in Lickskillet, Kentucky, we know where Lickskillet, Kentucky is. No one else will. We know whether or not there's a hole there. We know whether or not there's propagation issues. We know our customers' needs. We know where our customers go. So, yeah, we differentiate ourselves based on the customer experience. Our network is by far better than any other networks that are in our area, and that I think provides us with great credibility going forward.
Okay. And Craig?
Yeah, I'll echo all those sentiments. If you take a kind of an evolutionary biology analogy, we're all here. We're the survivors for a reason. We've done something right to get to where we're at, and it's that connection with the customer. I'll take a fair fight if the regulatory and the spectrum and the device availability, if all of that's a fair fight in front of us on the ground with the tier ones, we'll take that fight every day and we'll win it with that connection, that intimate connection with the customers that we serve. Yeah. And I wanted to echo the eSIM architecture. Maybe we could talk about that further, but we really I would encourage all of us to get engaged in the GSMA and the future of eSIM and the fungibility and the fluidity of that brings to customers, because it's a threat, but it's also an opportunity for all of us. And you can see 5 years from now a vision of brokers that are just coming in and selling networks and networks. And if we've got the best network and we provide through a dynamic system, people don't even, today we would negotiate traditional roaming agreements one-offs, but in the future you would have highly automated brokers that just see service metrics associated with our network, and we would dynamically pull traffic in that we wouldn't even know we had in the future. And that's really an opportunity for all of us in addition to a threat. And the eSIM architecture, you're seeing some public fights right now going on about how fluid that makes the devices. If I convince you to swap carriers over lunch, you should be able to go down to a pull-down menu and join my carrier at will. You can't do that today. You will when eSIM and all of those electronic subscription management mechanisms are in place.
There's so many topics that I want to cover, but I feel like this is one that we need to dig in a little bit more. Is how close are we to that sort of eSIM future where you just choose your carrier on your phone?
Well, the technology's here today.
Okay.
And you've got eSIM watches and eSIM phones. We're in the midst of that right now. What you're seeing, and I don't want to call them out by name, but you're seeing some public discussions about who's getting in the way of that, who's making that easy. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you that it's just the back-end mechanisms and the future of how we use that technology to have that goal where in the future your relationship could be directly with Samsung or directly with Apple as a consumer, and you wouldn't know any of us, but you might be on all of our networks simultaneously as you roam the country. That vision is really the mechanics of the back end, and we'll let that continue. But I would encourage all of us as carriers to participate in that discussion.
Okay. Very interesting. So, all right, next topic is the merger of Sprint and T-Mobile. And I just wanted to get sort of general reactions to this. Now, Craig, I know that C Spire has filed opposition to this merger at the FCC, and so I'm wondering if everybody's in opposition to the merger, and maybe just some real quick general comments about good or bad, for or against. or no comment, that's fine. Does anyone know? No one wants to go on to?
There'll be one less competitor if it goes through.
That is true.
I
leave
think,
it there. All right. It's fair. No, that's good.
I think most of us feel that Sprint's an easier company to work with than T-Mobile, and a lot of us have had a chance to work with Sprint, where a number of us have not had a chance to work with T-Mobile. So I think there's a reluctance to see this split from 4 bigs to 3 bigs in a lot of the independents' minds.
Yeah, I mean, and seriously, you do have the situation where there will be, if there is a merger, probably policy positions that have been taken by the remaining tier 1s that really put anyone in a tier 2, tier 3 position with much more risk. As Pat
much more risk?
As Pat was saying, the risk will be that our ability to, in the short term, be able to get roaming rates at a point where we can be competitive in the marketplace Certainly, elimination of a Sprint that has been a very friendly roamer to the Tier 3s certainly would be of concern. And maybe that isn't a short-term, but more of a medium-term concern as we do see more and more data usage. The interdependence of the industry that historically has been there has been just continued to be wiped away through the more silos that have been set up with the spectrum silos that have been set up in terms of how the carriers are providing their services. So I think it's a major concern moving forward in terms of roaming for the smaller carriers.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Michael.
And I would add that, I think all the national carriers really are looking at the regional carriers as mainly, there are exceptions, but mainly as cost to control. And when you're large and you get larger, it's harder to have, individual customized relationships. So there's sort of a natural movement of gravity away from partnering with smaller players. The bigger you get, and the more you think of it as really a cost center as opposed to a partnership approach. And so I'd go back to almost the eSIM thing. I think it's partly incumbent on us, the smaller carriers, the regional carriers, to get together and provide an offering that lowers the nuisance value and presents partnership solutions that make sense for them. Because I do think the national carriers need to partner. It's kind of crazy for them to spend a lot of money in most of the areas we're in when they have to go early on all the big technology bets with 5G, and their numbers that are at risk from things we were talking about here, for example, with the eSIMs are much larger and probably would happen sooner. So, but presenting that offering in a way that's compelling to the national carriers is not, is easier said than done.
Right. Okay. And so I had a question about roaming, and so I'll go to that because we're talking about roaming. Are you concerned about the roaming revenues that you have now? Do you see those declining over time, and do you feel like do you need to supplement that with something else? Just sort of maybe some general comments about the roaming business the next 2 to 3 years.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Michael. I'll give that one to you first.
Yes and yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's fair.
Yeah, I think the roaming revenue is going to deteriorate. No question about that. And I'm not really all that concerned about that. I'm more concerned about the roaming cost than I am the roaming revenue. If they both go down, that's fine.
Your cost to roam onto another network.
Exactly. Okay. It's still my biggest concern, because roaming revenue has to go down. The cost per megabyte has to go down, and so we're going to do that. We're going to have more of it, obviously, but in the end, I think you're going to see it deteriorate, and it's all about that balance. How do we end up at the end? What is the net is my concern.
Gotcha. And Craig, I wanted to actually give this roaming question to you, just because I know C Spire has sort of a lot of different operations, the wireline, the fiber, the other businesses that you discussed, and so is that an effort to? Is part of the strategy to also supplement roaming revenues? Is that the thinking, or is roaming sort of separate from this?
Well, any diversification strategy is good for any of us. So that stands alone. But specifically with respect to roaming, I want to echo all of the concerns, the yeses and the yeses. But really, when you get into it, what's data, what's voice, and all the double dipping and playing both sides of what is, circling around Title II, and all the shenanigans that have been in that place are really a threat for us in terms of having a viable option to put VoLTE traffic as CDMA goes away from us here in the years to come. We as a group don't have a viable path forward, and that needs to continue to be worked. It's a risk.
Yeah. And just very briefly, is VoLTE roaming, is that something that you all are working toward? Is that sort of the next step for sure?
Sure.
Yeah.
You have to.
You have to. Okay.
Verizon's been roaming VoLTE on us for 4 years.
Okay.
We've been roaming, or we've been roaming on them for about over a year now. So we're well into VoLTE traffic and learning the concerns that you have as you move forward in terms of quality of service. VoLTE doesn't work like switch circuit, and it doesn't work like data. So you have a network that maybe you've optimized for 4G data, but it's not optimized for VoLTE. Verizon, to its credit, spent a lot of years putting that in place and optimizing its quality. We, those who are also in partnership on the LRA side, are having to do that catch up. So we're still in the mode of having to fill in our gaps where we're seeing great 4G data traffic, but VoLTE still has some issues that we have to build.
Gotcha. Okay. And so to move on quickly to all the topics that we've got to get to. So we're, in terms of supplementing revenue, creating new revenue streams, I want to sort of focus on that and eventually get to 5G. But the first one I wanted to ask about was Internet of Things, IoT. And so I wondered if you could, if anyone wants to jump in with what their IoT strategy is, because there are a lot of options. There's, IoT with an LTE network. There's new flavors of LTE like LTE-M. There's separate offerings like LoRa that smaller carriers could offer IoT services. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on growing an IoT business. So maybe Michael, I'll
Sure.
keep picking on you. I'm sorry. You're closest to me.
Sure, I'm at your left hand.
Yeah.
I think we're looking at a lot of things. There's been a lot of talk, typical in the industry, there's been a lot of talk for a lot of time about this, and so far there's really not much revenue associated with IoT, but we at least believe that it's coming and it's real, and some of the technologies associated with 5G, from network slicing to other things, and really the ability to have a very high number of connected devices with low latency for a given node. That starts to enable a lot of interesting business models. And so we've done some early things in terms of sort of private LTE. We've done some things with some mines in Nevada and
building private LTE networks for those mines?
That's right. Okay. That's right. And we're looking at other industrial sites. We're looking at commercial sites. We have backed really a earlier stage company called Geoverse out of Seattle that is developing some very interesting technology around in-building coverage. That a key part of that, in-building coverage used to be about bringing 5-bar coverage indoors, and then while that's still important, we're now already moving fast towards a lot of services that you could now enable inside of the building, connected building, that smart building people have been talking about for a while. But again, with some of these developments from 5G, it really becomes possible. The price points there, the capabilities there to really...
And is it a thing to wait for 5G? Or is it something that, I guess you said, like already there's private LTE networks that you're operating for that?
Yeah, I think all of us are in the infrastructure business in the sense of, building out connectivity infrastructure. And you have to be, if you're too early, it's expensive, right. But if you're too late, it's even more expensive. So yeah. I think we think now's the time to really move on that. And there's some key things from policymakers like the CBRS stuff that seems to just, I wish that would get done and get done as originally contemplated to enable that. Okay.
Any other comments on IoT?
He covered it, I think, very well.
Yeah, it's a timing issue about when to get in exactly. And how far.
And I think IoT is sort of the same situation we were in several years ago with devices. That getting an order for 50,000 IoT devices for a rural carrier is probably just not cost effective. So there are many cases where we're still wrestling with economies of scale, and I think it goes back to the partnering issues that we need to have to be able to accomplish that.
Okay, so it's really not, from what I'm hearing, it's not quite ready. It's not quite fully baked in terms of really making a strong investment on IoT, at least right now, at least in 2018.
We piggyback more on existing technologies. So with our embedded LTE iPads, as an example, we have many farmers that are utilizing our technology, our networks, but in the control mechanisms as opposed to monitoring mechanisms. So it's just a matter of what piece of the IoT environment that you're into, and where you can find that niche to be able to provide that service.
Okay. All right.
And to your point,
Yeah.
I mean, the technologies, Cat-M and narrowband IoT, all of that, I mean, our hardware, the network's hardware is fully deployed. It's just a software license. You just flip a switch and turn it on. So it's really about the business case being solid for what you're doing. And as you're pointing out, the bringing of the devices on is completely different than it is for the handset side. It has to be highly automated, zero touch on our part, and customers or their VARs take care of them themselves. And really, the revenue for us comes on the managed services, the analytics, and all of those managed services that would sit on top of it. And that's incumbent upon us to deliver those kind of same intimate relationships, one-on-ones we have with our banks, our hospitals, our businesses, agriculture, to come in with those partnerships as a trusted partner versus the tier ones, and deliver that value in their place. That's where we'll make the revenue. It's not on the access side. The days of, deriving revenue off the access side for IoT are not there.
Okay. All right. So now, with the time we have remaining, I'm glad that we managed to not discuss 5G up until now very much, but let's go ahead and dive into it. And my first question about 5G is about fixed wireless. So as we all know, that Verizon has commercially launched their fixed 5G home service that is in a couple of markets right now. And so that's sort of their first use of 5G. So my question is that what you're hoping to use 5G for, is for fixed wireless? And then maybe you can discuss a little bit about your thinking about 5G. Is it something that you would invest in this year or next year or the year after? Kind of what's the investment sort of timeline look like? And so Pat, maybe I'll throw this one I'll throw this one to you first.
Sure.
Maybe just talk about
we already are looking at 5G, and we're looking at 5G is many things to many different people. So you can get into it in the RAN if you wanted, in the core, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at it, and we've got the NRs out there. We're working with those. And we expect that, yes, we'll certainly be using it for fixed wireless, if not this year and the next year. We've got a couple of demos that we're working on right now. So we'll be getting into it, and it's going to be one of those things where when does it make sense to become more involved in it? But we're definitely looking at it, and we want to make sure that we're ready for it as it becomes more and more important, because you just have to have the name 5G out there. And we're looking at, I think, October 12th, we have a demo in which we'll be going to our customers and saying, here's what 5G is about. So we'll have that going on, as well as a couple of demonstrations that we expect to actually be using it in 2019.
Huh, okay. And sorry, Pat, you said that you will launch a fixed service either this year or next year, a commercial service?
Right.
And so what, can you talk about the spectrum that you're using, or is it the 5G standard, or is it something else, dude? The launch of a fixed service?
We'll be using NR radios to a subdivision for a service for condominiums type of thing.
Okay.
So.
All right. Great. Ron, maybe I can give that one to you also.
We tried a fixed wireless business several years ago using our band 12 700 megahertz. Found through that process that the experience of the customer to provide a great service really is restricted by the amount of spectrum you have and the robustness of the network. So as we move toward 5G, certainly we see fixed wireless as the first play there. We're looking at doing tests in both 3.5 and millimeter wave next year. I think we want to be able to see for ourselves how that works in a rural environment.
And you said the fixed service that you ran in the band 12, are you still offering that, or has that been discontinued?
We're offering that, we're still offering that in our core markets, but where we had tried to move outside of our core markets and found that under the conditions the FCC had set for band class 12 build out, it really was a business killer from the standpoint that it required us to put capital in place in an area and not allow us to have a robust central network. We had to put little islands of band 12 around. And then when you throw customers on top of that and don't have a robust network around it, it didn't work. So we're much more concerned about as we move forward with 3.5 or with millimeter wave, making sure we understand how how robust that investment's going to have to be able to provide, especially in a rural environment. I mean, we'll have a good experience, I think, understanding of how that works in an urban environment from the tests that we're getting from the tier 1s, but to know whether or not we can go into a city of 20 or 30,000 or 5,000 and understanding whether or not there's really a business case for there, we really need to understand that technology in that environment.
And that is for your initial sort of 5G thoughts, it's really that. It's using maybe 3.5 gigahertz spectrum and 5G to offer fixed wireless. Like, yes. That's sort of the big opportunity when you think about 5G.
We say as the first steps, yeah.
That's it, okay. All right, any other?
C Spire's been public about using 3GPP NR, and in addition to 802.11 and its variants, 802.11ax and AY in the future. If you actually look at the IMT 2020 definition that owns what is 5G, it's an average user experience of north of 100 meg and peaks to a gig and above. And we're going to be 802.11 and its proprietary variants are going to deliver that. And actually right now at a much more cost-effective and a higher performance proof point that lets us actually build out the case. We can make that work. And that puts really, we've stated this publicly, that puts a lot of pressure on the 3GPP in our solutions to deliver and kind of meet in terms of a price performance ratio and deliver that value to the customers, which is low latent, they want internet and they want reliable, high speed and low latency internet. It's got, we are a symmetric GPON provider. That's the gold standard and we have to meet that. And specifically, we've been public about trials with phaser that we're doing now that are millimeter wave. We actually hold 28 gigahertz spectrum and we're using that. And then we actually we'll have some more partners that we're announcing next year that we're going to do symmetric 28 gigahertz with 802.11 variants proprietary, in addition to some NR trials as well.
And so, and like you said, you are commercially launching a fixed wireless service using 802.11ax now.
No. All of those chipsets, I think they come out in October. Okay. All of that starts, and you're going to see people actually use the AX variants in first quarter of next year. We actually have a platform that's based on AC. And AD, which are the predecessors to AX. And
right.
We need that map,
exactly.
That technology map.
It's the similar as to 5G. Now we have to learn about 802.11.
But that foundation is laid. We actually have a commercial service that we've already deployed, and it's a mesh system with 60 gigahertz. And then actually that's on the horizon as well for those, and for millimeter wave is what becomes of the mesh 60 gigahertz. They're self-access and backhaul, all in the system. They're conformal, they're adaptive. Those are, all those technologies are on the horizon in addition to we have a 3GPP presence. We travel the world. We have a team that actually participates in NR, like a few of our colleagues do in the CCA. But we're hedging our bets on 802.11, and we're not afraid to say it's proprietary. All the asterisks and the conditionals that everybody in the Twitter feeds that are going around what is and isn't 5G, I think we said it in your panel yesterday. 5 years from now, when customers are extracting value from us as internet service providers, whether it's fiber, whether it's fixed wireless, the days of asterisks being thrown around, they'll be forgotten and nobody will, that happened to us on what is and isn't 4G and exactly. T-Mobile and UMTS and all of that. No one will remember that here a few years from now. But we really do it is a space race. It's really today a lot about who's first and Me Too's and planting the flag and saying I was there. But once all those shenanigans are over and it really gets back to that's really kind of about us as carriers and fluffing feathers and all of that. When it's over, we need to stop those discussions and focus it back on the customer. And it really needs to return back to them and what are we delivering for them? What value are we?
Okay. And so, like you said, hedging your bets on 5G. Certainly looking at it, but it's not the only sort of game in town, essentially.
I was just saying hedging bets on technologies.
On technologies.
That deliver 5G. So it's just not through GPP NR.
Michael, I'll pick on you for this one also, and just to talk about sort of your thinking on 5G and maybe when investments might begin.
Well, we're already making some investments. I think we're the sort of fixed wireless last mile, if you will. I think one way or another we see that going. We have, like a lot of these folks, we have some wireline business as well, and at some point we could see that replacing some of that, at least the last drop and taking some expense out of the business for the wireline side. But I think we're looking at some fixed wireless technologies that I don't know if you technically call it 5G, but that are kind of advancing that ball, whereas the other aspect of 5G, Internet of Things I talked about earlier, I think that is probably the bigger one ultimately. So the fixed wireless is another way to deliver a connectivity service that is delivered today, and it might be better than wireline, it might be better than existing wireless solutions in the right places and the right technology. But I think when the industry can only make so much out of the standard customer base revenue, so I think it's really that next thing, which is developing new use cases and taking advantage of the ability to connect a lot of devices at very low latency. I think that's very interesting, and so we're looking a lot at that.
Okay. Yeah, and just with the few minutes that we have remaining, maybe you could talk about kind of, what is the opportunity 2 years down the road in terms of generating new revenue for regional carriers? I mean, you mentioned sort of use cases and looking at, where to invest and how to invest. I mean, what are you sort of hoping for in the next year or two in terms of a use case that you can profit from and make money from? Like, is it IoT operations? Is it fixed wireless? Is it something else? I know C Spire has been investing in data centers and things. I mean, where are you sort of putting your investment energies into for the next year or two or three maybe? So
I want to get back to the network of networks and the threat and the opportunity for us with respect to network sharing. And we said it yesterday on the panel, one of the most disruptive things about 5G for us as carriers is the core architecture, but it doesn't get talked about it much. And those are the things that enable network slicing. And you end up with, if you understand today how Google Fi works and how it's a network of networks specifically for them, it's T-Mobile and Sprint, and they dynamically almost switch back. If you actually move ahead for us in 5 years, all of our networks need to be part of a Google Fi the way it should. You can envision the way that plays out. And then we have brokers that dynamically use some of the 5G mechanisms on slicing and policy control to dynamically put traffic onto our networks and that's a revenue for us and a way for us to participate at a level, and that extends to IoT devices, that extends to mobility devices, and it all is enabled by a lot of that dynamic policy control. And you can think of it as Airbnb. I need an ocean view, I need 3 bedrooms, and I need a hot tub. Well, that hot tub's band 12. There's an analogy here. But those things get dynamically negotiated by automated systems in the back end that our networks can participate in. It's the biggest threat for us, and it's one of the biggest opportunities for us to remain relevant over the next 5 years.
Okay. Any other comments on that?
In rural America, there are still a lot of people that don't have internet. They still are working off of dial-up at best.
Yeah.
The marketplace for fixed wireless, for providing internet service period, is still a big potential market, I think, in a rural environment. It's a matter of finding that business case that allows us to be able to go out there and serve those customers. And I think that's our focus. We're hometown people looking to try and provide services to those hometown people. And those are the needs that we need. We would have loved to have had a band class 12 network that had the capacity to fill all the needs. We'd have a lot more revenue if we could have had today. And we see that in the next 5 years. That's where it's going to go.
That's it. Okay.
I agree with Ron that there's a huge market that's still available with the internet, and we've got a lot of customers we have to serve, and we have to serve them better. That means more fiber in the ground. It means we're going to be working on more towers, small cells. We construct towers. We'll be using our drones, and all that area is still full of a tremendous amount of growth. So we think there's bright futures for the rural carriers.
There we go. I think. Michael,
I agree with Airbnb, and I agree with closing the digital divide in rural areas. I think both are very interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Please join me in thanking our excellent speakers today.
Wow, that was great to hear. Thank our distinguished panelists for sharing some of their insight. We got Michael, Pat, Ron, and Craig, all great assets to CCA also. It's interesting to hear their take. While they're setting up real quick, we got one more thing to do and take care of. I also want to thank Mike Dano for skillfully leading the discussion. Mike, I think you're still here. Thank you. Now we're going to turn to our annual Achievement Awards. And each year, CCA recognizes outstanding members who have made a significant contribution to the association.